The internet is a vast place. Nearly any question that comes to mind can be answered with a simple keystroke. Any curiosity can be quelled with a simple search term. And yet, when we hit enter and look upon the very answer we sought out to find, many of us experience a very peculiar kind of cognitive dissonance. The answer you sought out is grotesque and disturbing. And yet, you can't look away, and you don't know why. It's almost like coming to grips with our morbid reality is a task fit for no one. This image is of 2nd Lieutenant Henry Ralph Lumley. He was a British World War I pilot and a burn victim. Not much is known about him. He was born March 20th, 1892. His father was an author and his mother was an actress. After graduating from Christ Hospital School in his youth, he started working at Eastern Telegraph Company before being commissioned as an officer into the Royal Flying Corps. As a result, he went to the Central Flying School for pilot training. Unfortunately, as he graduated from the Central Flying School, the aircraft he was flying crashed. Lumley was severely burned, losing his lips, eyebrows, and most of the skin on his face. His left eye was burned out, and his right eye was mostly blind. He elected to try out some experimental surgery, specifically reconstructive surgery. Lumley was transferred to a local hospital on September 22, 1917. The surgical team, led by Harold Gills, decided to reconstruct Henry's face using a skin graft from his chest. There would be a lot of scar tissue left over, but Lumley wasn't concerned with that. He was concerned with having a new face. The operation was performed in stages, the first on October 24th, and it was meant to map out his chest graft, specifically which portions of his chest had the correct tissue needed for his face. The second stage was more major. It occurred on February 15th, 1918. The scar tissue was excised, effectively removing all traces of Lumley's old face, and the graft was stitched into place. Unfortunately, because of the size of the graft and Lumley's already weakened state, the chest skin was rejected, and Henry died of heart failure on the 11th of March, 1918. This image is of Amelia Earhart packing her Lockheed Vega 5B for another flight. This time it would be over the Pacific. A little before this picture was taken, she'd flown over the Atlantic, being the first woman to do so. She wrote her experience flying over the Atlantic, and every one of her books became bestsellers, firmly placing her as an aviation pioneer. And in this image, she's preparing for another experience. This time, she's attempting to circumnavigate the entire planet. It's called the World's Flight. The flight plan was supposed to go like this. Beginning in May 20th, 1937, she'd depart from Oakland, California. She'd fly across the United States, stopping in Miami, Florida to refuel. Then from there, she'd fly from Florida all the way to French Sudan. And then from there, she'd fly from Calcutta in British India, and from there to Darwin, Australia. She would also make multiple stops in the Pacific, using many islands, specifically New Guinea, Howland Island, and then finishing her flight in Honolulu, Hawaii. Everything seemed well after leaving Oakland, California on May 20th. At every refueling stop she made in America, South America, Africa, and the Indian subcontinent, she made sure to radio back her coordinates and exact time. But when she reached New Guinea on July 2nd of 1937, she went radio silent forever. No remains of either her plane or her body have ever been recovered. She was declared legally dead January 5th of 1939, forever known as an American aviation pioneer who unfortunately vanished, completing the most ambitious flight of her time. This is a portrait of Aidan Briers, born April 12, 1880. He was a wealthy American socialite, athlete, and industrialist. He had a very privileged upbringing. He was educated at St. Paul's School and Yale College. He had a reputation of having an overachieving libido and exceptional skill at golf. In 1927, Briers injured his arm after falling from a railway, and as a result, he had persistent pain. His personal physician encouraged him to take the medication Radiator. It was a radioactive medication due to its main ingredient being radium, atomic number 88. In the late 1920s, radium was seen as a magical element, with many people claiming that it would cure any ailment, and interestingly enough, radium also held the claim that it would stop aging, leading to its inclusion in many makeups and facial creams for women. After being prescribed Radiator, Briers began taking several doses of it every day, believing it would give him a toned-up feeling, but stopped in October 1930 after taking some 1,400 doses. There was a noticeable physical change. He lost weight and had headaches. His teeth began to fall out. He wasn't the only one experiencing this. Many people during the late 20s and early 30s were complaining to the Federal Trade Commission that radium products were making them sick. And when the Federal Trade Commission asked him to testify about his experience, he declined the offer to show up. So the Federal Trade Commission sent a lawyer to take his statement at home, and the lawyer reported the following. When entering his home, he saw Briers laying in bed. When the lawyer glanced at Briers' face, he only saw his upper jaw and 2 front teeth. His lower jaw had completely fallen off, and the flesh surrounding his mouth was disintegrating. With further examination, there were holes in the base of his skull where previous bone material simply disintegrated and fell off. He died on March 31st, 1932, and it was attributed to radiation poisoning, using the terminology of the time, but in reality it was due to cancers. He was buried in a lead-lined coffin, and when exhumed in 1965 for study, his remains were still highly radioactive. This image is of a breastplate. It belonged to 19-year-old Antony Favoraux, a French soldier who died in the Battle of Waterloo in 1815 when he was hit with a cannonball. It's more than obvious that this cannonball resulted in this poor man's death, but what isn't obvious is how deadly cannonballs really were at that time. As a soldier in the early 1800s, you would encounter 2 different types of cannonballs: exploding and round shot. Exploding cannonballs were usually made out of stone or iron and were hollowed out and filled with gunpowder. Round shot, the type of cannonball that killed Antony Favoraux, was made out of solid wrought iron and shaped into a sphere ball and designed with the expressed intention of wiping out as many people as possible. Now, that might be a little bit confusing. How can one shot with a cannonball kill multiple people? Well, like Antony Favoraux, a shot by a cannonball usually hits the chest, with a cannonball at that time traveling through the air with an average speed of 820 feet per second, or 250 meters per second. When striking a human body, typically in the chest, it turns all bones in your chest, typically the ribs, into shrapnel that would subsequently kill whoever was behind you and to the left and right of you. And that truly puts into perspective what Antony Favoraux experienced. Not only did he die a quick death, his remains were turned into shrapnel in an instant and almost certainly killed those who were fighting with him. The image you see here is a violent one. It depicts a Japanese soldier beheading a Chinese POW after the capture of Nanjing in 1937. The Nanjing Massacre, alternatively known as the Nanking Massacre, was an episode of mass murder and mass rape committed by the Imperial Japanese troops against residents of Nanjing. In the late 1930s, Nanjing was known as the capital of China, and capturing it was a priority of the Japanese military during the Second Sino-Japanese War. The massacre occurred over a period of 6 weeks, starting on December 13, 1937, the day that the Japanese captured Nanjing. During this period, soldiers of the Imperial Japanese Army murdered disarmed Chinese soldiers and innocent Chinese civilians, numbering an estimated 40,000 to 300,000 people being killed. Also during those 6 weeks, there were widespread kidnapping, rape, and pillaging of the entire capital. This image in particular was one of those many killings. The man on his knees is a Chinese prisoner of war, who before being beheaded was disarmed of all of his weapons and then tied up. This image is a lot darker than it may seem, because the man is already dead. The blade of the Japanese soldier has already decapitated him. The picture was taken at just the moment right before his head fell off of his shoulders. This is a wholesome image of a mall Santa. His name is Bruce MacArthur, and during the Christmas season, he works odd jobs, one of them being a mall Santa. From first glance, he looks like a regular dude just trying to make a kid's day. But after a lengthy court appearance, he would end up being convicted of 8 counts of first-degree murder for killing, then dismembering the bodies of 8 of his victims and hiding said body parts in planter pots. What do you see in this image? Can you recognize what it's supposed to be? From first glance, it looks like a smattering of seats, bars, wires, and clothing. Maybe people? It's confusing because you can't discern what it used to be. The image you're seeing right now is the aftermath of the 1995 Baku metro fire. An electrical malfunction caused a fire on the underground train, leaving over 303 people dead. On October 28, 1995, a fire broke out in the subway system of Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan. The fire was initially caused by an electrical fault, and it occurred during rush hour, about 6 p.m. The affected train, consisting of 5 fully loaded cars, had just left the station, and the passengers in car number 5 smelled smoke. Later, passengers in car 4 observed white smoke, which soon turned black and caused eye irritation of all those in the car. The driver of the train reported the incident and demanded that the power be cut. However, lethal emissions of carbon monoxide from burning synthetic materials in the cars quickly affected the passengers, causing delirium and unconsciousness. The passengers were forced to evacuate through another car. Some 15 minutes after the fire started, the ventilation system was switched on to exhaust mode, which most of the smoke was drawn into, all while people were being electrocuted while trying to grasp at cables in order to escape the blazing train. The majority of those killed, including 28 children, were found inside the train. Most of them were either crushed or trampled to death. 40 bodies were found inside the tunnel, and survivors recalled sparks flying from high-voltage cables just after the train left the station. The estimated number of victims varied after the fire. Morgue officials reportedly counted at least 303 bodies, while independent Azerbaijani news agency Tehran quoted medical officials as saying that the number of people killed was 337. A 2-day mourning period was declared, and the train company, Lukoil, rendered $9,000 in financial aid to families of the victims. This portrait is from an unknown dementia patient. His psychiatrist told him to paint himself every time they met. This was meant to gauge his cognitive ability. Painting himself was a good gauge of this. It was something that he was very good at, and the act of painting himself proved whether or not he could recognize himself. Unfortunately, his dementia progressed. As time passed, he would make a portrait, and each one would become more and more crude. The backgrounds were the first to go. They would become less specific. It would just be colors or random shapes. Then next, it was the face. It became more and more distorted, increasingly less and less specific. They became like concepts of a face, more of a generic old man than himself, and this is because he was forgetting himself. His dementia had progressed so drastically that he had forgotten what he looked like. That, along with all of his skills when it came to painting, it's almost like painting was his identity, because he lost both at the same time. What's up, everybody? It's your boy Ailurus, aka Panda Daddy, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. And if you did, let me know in the comments down below, and leave a like if you liked the video. And if you're new to my channel, go ahead and subscribe, fam. What you doing watching videos and not subscribing? And if you're old, make sure you hit that bell so you get these notifications every time. Seriously, a lot of you guys wanted this new installment into the series. I didn't think it was going to be as popular as it was when I did this for Halloween week, but a lot of you guys really liked Morbid Reality, so I'm more than willing to make more episodes. I know a lot of you guys were frustrated that it did not come out last week. I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure it was good. So here you go. Here's your video. I hope you can quell your anger with me. So as always, you gotta thank the Patreon supporters that makes videos like this really possible. Thank you so much to Destroyer, Emily R, Trey, Muffy Lou Who, Brody Gilbert, Noah, Sir Teacup, Trenton Golden, Vermont, Ethan, John Robinson, Eva, Arolina, Catherine Taylor, Arjen, Pixie Art 5, Hannah, Keith Myers, Will Billy, Dustin, and Hostmar. Thank you so much for your support. It is greatly appreciated. And if you want to help support the channel, there are 2 links in the description, one to my merch store and one to my Patreon. Both funds go directly into the channel so we can maintain what's happening here. And as always, stay zesty.